Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Going to be doing kind of a short one today. I've been getting increasingly sick the last couple of days, and to compound that, we have not had heat for 2 days at our house. The part has finally come in for our furnace, and so they're going to be repairing it late this afternoon. We've managed to get by, and it actually hasn't been all that cold until last night in Northeast Ohio, so we've been very blessed. But I've just been miserably sick. I'm waiting for the results of a COVID test. Hopefully it comes back negative. So I just don't have a lot of energy for a long video today. I hope you guys understand. We're going to dive into a simple history video about firing squads today. I thought it would be interesting to talk about this a little bit, not only by using this video and talking about firing squads in World War I, but we could look at some statistics and talk about how prevalent executions were for desertion in other wars. So we'll look at some of those stats toward the end. I just want to give a quick shout out to Paolo Corradini, who is our most recent executive producer patron, who signed up for an entire year, paid for an entire year at one time. So I'm grateful for that, Paolo. Your support is much appreciated, as is the support of every person who has signed up as a patron. We've had like 20 new patrons and 10 new members in the last week, which is amazing. So I'm grateful to all of you, and we'll be doing some more patron related stuff here very soon. But let's go ahead and dive into this video. As always, the link is in the description below.
Firing squads, World War I. Even the most seasoned of veterans were unprepared for the horrors of the First World War. The British Army used execution by firing squad like no other combatants as a method to maintain order on the battlefield. This controversial method of execution was used for crimes of cowardice, desertion, espionage, murder, or mutiny. Senior commanders took a soldier's refusal to return to the front line as desertion, and used this harsh disciplinary punishment as a way of deterring others from doing so. Many of these soldiers would have been suffering from shell shock, the sustained psychological and physical stress of being in the trenches.
And shell shock's had a lot of different names over time. Today we know it as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. They called it shell shock for a while. At one point it was called battle fatigue. There's the very famous incident in World War II where General Patton, the American general, goes into a hospital in Sicily, and he's going around and paying his respects to these wounded soldiers, and then he comes across a soldier who's in there for battle fatigue, shell shock, PTSD, and calls him a coward, slaps him, orders him back to the front lines. It happened 2 different times, I think, in Sicily. So a lot of different commanders had very different ideas on this. Abraham Lincoln was known to regularly pardon people who had been sentenced to death for desertion during during the American Civil War, and we'll look at some of those statistics at the end.
At the time, commanders and medical officers were not sympathetic and saw this mental breakdown as an attempt to escape their duty. Those that were caught deserting received court-martial. If they were sentenced to death, they would be blindfolded with a white paper target on their chests and stood tied to a pole or sat in a chair where a firing squad of 12 men would shoot them at dawn. Some prisoners even refused to wear a blindfold, preferring to look at their executioners. Executioners in a firing squad.
Which is kind of interesting when you think about the fact that more often than not, this is an execution for desertion. So these are people that didn't want to be on the front lines, didn't want to face enemy gunfire, and yet are willing to stare at the face of their own comrades as they're shot at the end. There's this fascinating, I want to say it was from Tales from the Crypt, maybe. I'll have to look at the end and see. But there's this fascinating story with Kirk Douglas playing an American officer whose son, who's played by his real son, Eric Douglas, who sadly passed away from, I think, a drug overdose. His son is a coward in World War I on the battlefield, and he's arrested and he's tried for desertion. He's sentenced to death. And his father, played by Kirk Douglas, meets with him the night before and says, listen, I'm in a position of authority here. I'm not going to let them really kill you. So just show me how brave you can be. I'll make sure they're loaded with blanks. You'll fall backwards. Everybody will march off, and then we'll get you out of here. but it's all a farce. He's actually facing a real firing squad. He just wants his son to actually be brave for once in his life. And his son realizes it at the very last second that he is in fact facing real bullets. So it was pretty fascinating.
Often couldn't pull the trigger, and most did not want to be in the role. Often they were soldiers that were recovering from wounds but could still fire a rifle. One method to avoid executioners hesitating to shoot was to issue blank cartridges to one random member or all but one member of the firing squad. In the squad, no one was told who had the live or blank firing weapon. This way, a diffusion of responsibility was reinforced amongst the firing squad. The first soldier in the BEF to be executed during the First World War was Private Thomas Highgate during the retreat at Mons in 1914. He deserted his battalion after 2 weeks of action and was discovered wearing civilian clothes, hiding in a barn by a gamekeeper. His uniform was concealed nearby. He was tried by court-martial and was undefended at his trial because all of his comrades had been killed, injured, or captured. He was found guilty of desertion and died by firing squad on the 8th of September 1914 at the age of 19.
Just 19 years old. Think about yourself at 19. Some of you guys are that old. Myself at 19, let alone now at 44. Boy, it's tough for me to try and pass judgment on these guys for their fear in the face of battle like that. I mean, especially if you think about World War I. I mean, of all the wars, that would be a tough one to be in, because not only are you facing relentless artillery fire, but you're dealing with months in these cold, wet, dank trenches. You're seeing the bodies of your friends laying out on the battlefield and decaying, and you can't get to them and give them a proper burial. You go through something like the British did at the Somme, where you have units taking 80 and 90% casualties. Boy, it'd be easy to think about just slipping out one night and taking your chances. So I don't begrudge these guys what they did at all. I understand it completely.
306 British and Commonwealth soldiers were executed by firing squad in the First World War, and their names were left off war memorials.
Watch our other video.
All right, so let's take a look at some statistics about how prevalent this was in some of the most recent wars. First of all, as an American, I want to talk about Eddie Slovic for a minute. Many of you maybe have heard of him. He is the only American soldier since the Civil War who has been executed for desertion. It says here over 21,000 American soldiers were giving varying sentences for desertion during World War II, including 49 death sentences, but Slovic's was the only one who was actually carried out. He was in the 28th Infantry Division, which I think that's a Pennsylvania unit, isn't it? But he's buried in Plot E of the Oin Ein American Cemetery and Memorial, alongside 95 American soldiers who were executed for rape or murder. Their grave markers are hidden from view by shrubbery and bear sequential numbers instead of names, making it impossible to identify them individually without knowing the key. So that's the only one we know of for the Americans since the Civil War. But let's take a look and see if there have been any others from other countries. In the American Civil War, only 147 Union soldiers were tried and convicted and executed for treason. Not for treason, for desertion. There were thousands of soldiers who deserted. In fact, in my own research and digging into military records, I would say easily a third of all Union soldiers deserted at some point. Most of them came back. They would desert for a while. There were amnesties that were issued that said if you return, you'll just have to serve out. You'll have to serve as though let's say you were gone for 6 months. We'll add 6 months to the end of your enlistment term, and you'll forfeit pay, things like that. But by and large, Lincoln was not of the mindset of wanting to execute a bunch of 16, 17-year-old boys for desertion. In fact, you see a scene in the movie Lincoln where he's sitting by a couple of guys in the White House and he wakes them up at 4 a.m. because he's pondering a 16-year-old who injured his own horse so he didn't have to go into combat, and pardons his execution. So just one more statistic to look at to give you a little sense of how things were on the other side during World War II. 15,000 German soldiers were executed for desertion, and up to 50,000 were killed for minor acts of insubordination. A number of them were summarily executed, often in the moment, by their officers or comrades when they refused to follow commands. Now, this did not only happen on the Axis side. There are stories of American officers, pulling out a gun and shooting an enlisted man for drunkenness, for disobeying an order in the heat of battle, things like that. It was said that Captain Spears did this as part of Easy Company when he was a platoon leader in Dog Company in the 506 Parachute Infantry. Whether he did or not, I'm not 100% sure, but this was a pretty common thing. All right, on the French side, in World War I, it looks like 554 soldiers received a death sentence. 49 of those were executed by firing squad. I read a statistic that showed something on the order of a couple of 100,000 Soviet soldiers were executed during World War II. Of course, in World War II, the Soviets often would have, I think they were called blocking soldiers, who would stand at the back when there was an attack. And they would shoot anyone who ran back from the front lines during the attack. You see this in the movie Enemy at the Gates, where they actually have people set up at the start of an attack, and they tell them, hey, we're going to shoot you if you turn around and come back. So it was much harsher in the Soviet Union, where they didn't seem to have nearly the value for human lives, enemy or otherwise. So those are just some statistics. If you guys want to continue this conversation, use the comment section below. Thought it was an interesting topic to talk about. What do you think about the idea of executing soldiers? I've never served in the military. I understand the need for discipline and the need and how fear can very quickly infiltrate the ranks. And so there's a big concern that if a couple people start showing a lot of fear, it can infect the rest of your line and be a real detriment to morale, things of that nature. But so can executing people, I guess. So I don't know. Just let me know your thoughts about any of this. If you know any specific statistics or stories you want to share, use the comment section below. And hopefully I'll get feeling better, come back tomorrow with some more content for you. Thanks for watching.